But what you really want to do in this world, in the 21st century, in our decade, is skills. You want to be learning skills. The more skills you have, and I mean true skills, I don't mean trying something out for a year and then going on to something else for another. I mean getting real skill at something, right? Whether it's in computers, whether it's in the arts, in any field. Real skill. And then if you can develop 2 or 3 skills by the time you're in your 20s and still have some fun, the world is going to open up to you, because what you're going to be able to do when you turn 30 is you're going to go, I can take that skill that I learned in computers, I can take that skill I learned in media and in creating a podcast or whatever, and I can create a business that's going to combine the two in a way that no one has ever thought of, because I'm a unique person. The world will open up to you. Skills are the gold of the 21st century. And if you're seduced by money, if you think about money, you're doomed, because that's not what matters in life. Because let's say you have 2 job offers. One is at Goldman Sachs, opening position for $150,000 a year, and one is at some startup for $30,000 a year, and you're living in New York and you're going to be starving. You're going to be sharing a miserable little flat somewhere in Bushwick, whatever, okay? Take the $30,000 a year job, because you're going to learn so much. You're going to be hands-on. Whereas in that other job, you're going to be lost in there. You're going to be among hundreds of other young people, and you're not going to have responsibilities. Here you're going to have responsibilities. So money is not what matters to you. Because when you're in your 20s, you can starve. You can live on less food. You can have it a little tough because you're young. I know myself. I was very poor. I lived in London. I had a job in London in 1984, I believe. 84. And I was making, I think it was £30 a week. Maybe it's less than that. It was my starting salary. And my girlfriend at the time, the only thing we could eat was turnips and cauliflower. Cauliflower cheese was our main dish. But I was 25. I could handle it. So you can handle not making money and learning, because that's what's most important.
I don't think many young people in that first season of life realize how long life is. So, we try and take shortcuts. We try and get to the money as fast as we can. But you're telling me to take a longer road, which is the acquisition of skills, even at the cost of some of those short-term rewards that are very tempting to post on my Instagram.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also, you look at somebody like Steve Jobs. I can relate to that because he wasn't interested in money at all. It was never the motivating factor. It's never been my motivating factor, right? I wanted to have fun, and I wanted to be successful, and I wanted to be able to write. He wanted to design the most beautiful pieces of technology in the world. It ended up he was like the richest man in the world at the time, but he never cared about money. It wasn't what motivated him. I never cared about money, and now I'm not as rich as Steve Jobs, but I'm doing fairly well. Because it'll come to you. If you play the game right, if you learn the skills when you're young, and then you develop your own business, by the time you're 35, you'll be making 4 times what you would have made at that Goldman Sachs job, right? Mm-hmm. That's how the game is played these days. Starting your own business, being an entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur is the most powerful position you can aim for. Some people aren't destined for that. That's not in their DNA. But to me, that's what we should all be aiming for, to be your own boss. Because personally, I hated working for other people. But being an entrepreneur, starting your own business, one that has a niche in this world, you're going to make all the money that you'll ever need.
It's quite painful being an entrepreneur, though. I think it was actually Elon that said, building his businesses is like chewing glass and staring into the abyss. And I can relate to some degree of the businesses that I've built over the years, and just the immense hardship and uncertainty. And, I guess there's at times a subtle envy for your team members who are unaware of the chaos that one has to endure to make sure everybody's paid on time and, make sure everyone's happy.
Okay, but the lesson for me in all of that is altering your sense of what pleasure and happiness is. So in the moment, it's painful, right? And we don't like pain. Nobody likes pain. I don't like pain, right? Mm-hmm. But if your sense of what pleasure is and happiness is only like here from the present moment to here, it's going to be very hard to get out of that. But if your sense of pleasure and happiness is here,
long term,
yeah, then you've got power, you've got maneuverability, you have room to maneuver, and that's the key to the whole thing. So,
okay, so you're saying that if I have a short-term view on happiness, I expect it today, now, and every day.
Yeah.
Then my life's not going to be great. But if I expect happiness to be a long-term,
yeah. So I mean, look at you now. Is what I'm trying to say. You're pretty happy, I imagine.
Yeah, I am.
You're pretty fulfilled, right?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have gotten there if, when you were 24 or whatever, you just gave up because it was so painful. I better just go grab that easy job working for a bank or something. You'd be miserable now. Whereas look at you now. That's what I'm trying to open people's minds to. Follow Stephen Bartlett here. That's the model.
One of the things that I think helped me get here is my dark side. You talk about dark sides a lot. And when I say my dark side, I mean the insecurity, the shame, the wanting to fit in, all of those kinds of things that acted as a driving force. And a lot of people have a dark side. I've heard you talk about how all great achievers have a bit of a dark side in them. How do we channel our dark side so that it's productive and not destructive? I was talking to someone the other day who is a very successful entrepreneur, and they have their own story of like shame and embarrassment and trying to run away from a certain life they used to have.
Right.
And that made them successful. But now they work 18 hours a day. They're just like almost addicted to their work.
Right.
So I wonder if it can go too far.
I see. Yeah.
But they say they're happy.
They do.
Yeah, they say they're really happy.
And do you believe it?
It's hard to distinguish true happiness from the contentment that you get when you are successfully escaping your dark side. Do you know what I mean by that? Because this individual has successfully ran away from their darkness, and they appear to be in a state of contentment.
Yeah.
Because they're succeeding in their pursuit of running away from their past. But I don't know if that's happiness. Some yogi might tell me that happiness is when you stop running.
Well, I worked for somebody. I was on the board of directors for this company, American Apparel, which no longer exists. And the CEO, Dov Charney, was the founder of the company, an incredible entrepreneur who, from one little shop here in Los Angeles, when I met him, created this empire. And it was incredibly rewarding, and he was, I'd say, a very fulfilled person. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't stop. It was like a demon possessed him. He had to have more. He had to build more buildings. He had to have more American Apparels all over the world. He leveraged himself, and then when the crash occurred in 2007, just after the company went public, he was so in debt that the company never recovered, right? He tried too hard. He didn't know the limits, okay? So part of this isn't, when I said if money motivates you, then you're going to have that demon. If fame and reputation motivates you, then that demon is going to seize you by the throat and going to make you work 18 hours until everybody eats your dust and you humiliate all your enemies and you're miserable, right? So knowing who you are and knowing what matters is going to save you from that kind of demonic possession, because you're actually not going to be very successful if you're like that. You're going to burn yourself out. You're not going to have very good ideas. What happens to a lot of people when they become successful is, first of all, it goes to their head. They think they have the Midas touch. They think they've got the golden touch. And then their minds start going in this kind of this singular direction. They learned how to do something, and they're just doing it. And they don't know how to learn. They don't know that there's other ways of doing things, right? And that's what happens when you become completely possessed and your mind isn't open and it isn't free and isn't expanding and you're not creative anymore. To be creative will require you to try something different, to not expand your company endlessly like he did, and instead to take the 5 branches that you have here in Los Angeles and make the product better and be more creative with it, and don't be possessed by money and fame and reputation. That's the answer, I think, there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, yeah. Yeah, it's something that I think many many a person struggle with, which is in part this idea of focusing on the thing in front of you versus getting too distracted with other opportunities. And I wanted to talk to you about this idea of focus.
Sure.
And how important you think it is for mastery.
Yeah.
I meet so many young people who will say to me, oh, I'm doing this little crypto thing here, and I've got this hair business here, and I've got this other thing here. What would you say to those people that are trying to become a master in this world as it relates to focus?
It's funny because I'm helping the son of an old friend of mine who's got that problem, and he's incredibly successful. I hope he's not listening to this. He's 20 years old. He's very wealthy. He's done amazing things. But he's one of those people who spread himself out to all these different things. And I can't find a through line, what connects them all, except making money and having connections and stuff. And it's very alluring in this world, particularly, where there's so many possibilities where you can get on the internet, you can learn this, that, the other people are doing these things. You can get into crypto, you can, start your own business here. You can get into the health and fitness world. You can, and then later on try to figure out how to connect them all. But life doesn't work like that. That's not how the brain functions. That's not what we were meant for, because it doesn't start from you. The whole thing has to start from you. It can't start from the world. It can't start from what other people are doing. It can't start from what's sexy. It has to come from within. If it doesn't come from within, then you're going to be floundering for years and years and years. And so what I've done with this young person, whose name I won't mention but I love dearly, is what is it that really is in your heart? What is it that you really, really love? How can we connect this crypto with this media business that you're starting, with the sports world that you're starting, with this fitness thing? What connects them all, And to me, I was getting the sense, we haven't solved it yet, but he's kind of excited by celebrities and by that world. And that's fine. I think there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm saying, well, maybe what connects all this is the film business, right? Because the film business is pretty wide-ranging. To be a producer, to raise money, you're dealing with all kinds of different people. You're networking. You're meeting starlets. It's a glamorous life, but it's focused, okay? So, when you focus on something, the world just kind of opens up, but you have to be focusing on the right thing. So if you were meant to be a writer and then you decide because you want money to go into law school and then you focus very deeply on law school, what will happen is for a year or two, you'll be able to skid by, but then the wheels will start going slower and slower because you're not interested in it. You're not connected to it. You get bored and your focus will start falling to pieces. But if it's something you love, you can focus on that for 7, 8, 10, 12 years and never get bored.
From observing a certain family member of mine do a very similar thing, part of it as well is that when she would start one pursuit, starting X business, it would get hard, as it always does. And when you look over at the person across the road, they seem to be having a much easier life with their thing, or with their crypto, or with their whatever.
Yeah.
And they tell you the story of how much money they've made and how easy it was, whatever. So you get tempted into believing that the grass is greener, you pursue that. So now you're doing two things. Now your first thing starts to suffer.
Yeah.
And I think especially in the early season of life, when you don't have Elon Musk resources, much of the game is focusing enough on one thing to build those resources so that you have the chance of being able to do it more than one thing or spreading your bets a bit more. But in that first season, when you're in resource accumulation phase, I think my early investors in my company, I remember one day emailing my first investor, who's a very successful man, and saying, I've got an idea. And it was an idea other than the one he'd invested in. And I remember the email, I was 18 years old, and he hit me so hard on that email. He was like, if you don't focus on one thing, you will never, ever
Wait,
be
you were
successful.
the one that was interested in this other
Yeah,
thing.
I was trying to...
He was the one,
Yeah, so my investor, he was a very successful man, and I emailed him this other idea, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah.
And he sent me this email back, which was like being hit by a whip. And he was like, if you don't focus on one thing now, you will never be successful. Because also you rob yourself, as you said, of the chance of accumulating deep skills.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I remember this is something that wise people know. And if you're young, if you have like a mentor like you did, who could tell you the truth, the ropes as they are. It will help save you years of misery. I remember when we were at American Apparel, it was the year 2007. The company was just about to go public. I was about to be put on the board of directors, and this man came to me who was like your investor, and he said, Robert, just make sure that Dove's doesn't mindlessly expand. Make the brand focused. Have it focused on one thing, and then he will be successful. At the time, I thought that was interesting, but I didn't really have the guts to explain that to Dove. But there are people out there who understand the truth of this. But the other thing about envy, like you say, you see your other friend doing crypto and they're having so much fun and making so much money. I tell you, it's bullshit. They're not having as much fun as you think, right? People create a front on Instagram or TikTok or wherever, where life seems so glorious, but they're never having as much fun as you might imagine. You know, in my book, Laws of Human Nature, I talk about Aristotle Onassis, who in the 60s was the wealthiest man in the world. He was married to John F. Kennedy's widow, Jacqueline Kennedy, Jacqueline Onassis. Who could be happier than that? He had yachts, etc. He was the most unhappiest, miserable person in the world, as Jacqueline Kennedy explained in her autobiography. He was such a mean-spirited, unhappy person. Yet everybody envied him because he had this beautiful wife and all that money. The people you envy are not doing nearly as well as you think. So don't let that influence your decisions in life.
I've never forgotten a certain Johnny Ive clip that I watched many, many years ago. I think must have been 5 years ago now, where he talks about working with Steve Jobs. And this is what he says in the clip. And I've never forgotten it. Never forgotten it.
This sounds really simplistic, but it still shocks me how few people actually practice this. And it's a struggle to practice. But is this issue of focus. Steve was the most remarkably focused person I've ever met in my life. And the thing with focus is it's not sort of like this thing you aspire to or you decide on Monday, you know what, I'm going to be focused. It is every minute, why are we talking about this? This is what we're working on. You can achieve so much when you truly focus. And one of the things that Steve would say, because I think he was concerned that I wasn't, he would say, how many things have you said no to? And I would, honestly, I would have these sacrificial things, because I wanted to be very honest about it, and so I'd say, oh, I said no to this, and no to that. And but he knew that I wasn't vaguely interested in doing those things anyway. So there was no real sacrifice. What focus means is saying no to something that you, with every bone in your body, you think is a phenomenal idea, and you wake up thinking about it, but you say no to it because you're focusing on something else.
Yeah. Amen. That's the church of focus. I agree with completely. I mean, I hate using my own examples because I'm a rara avis, I'm a rare bird. But, I have this book that I'm writing, okay? And it's on a very specific subject. And I get distractions all the time. People want, I can do this speaking engagement in India where I've never been before, or Egypt, kind of thing, or get involved in this television project. And I'm actually never really seduced by it because I just love writing. But where it really comes down to is I'm writing this book and it's been going really not well. It's because I'm not focused on the actual thing I'm trying to say. So you can bring that level of focus down to the finest point of your business or your writing or whatever. What is it you're trying to say? What is it you're trying to accomplish? What is your brand really about? Get into the nitty-gritty, get into the little fine grains of sand and know what that is. So every time I'm writing my chapter and I start writing about something that's not directly relevant to what it's about and what the reader's going to be interested in, I'm making a mistake. And I make the mistake for several weeks and then I realize it and I pull back. So that level of focus has to have a lot of energy behind it because you're so in love with what you're doing that when you deviate from it, this little radar inside of your brain goes, you're off, you got to get back to it, right? And it's painful, but when you do get back to it and when things do click, it's incredibly pleasurable. So the focus for young people that seems so painful, God damn it, everyone else is having so much fun and I'm having to learn this. Just keep telling yourself that you're doing something that your brain is going to reward you with several years down the line. So that friend of yours that seems to be having so much fun, in 3 years, they're going to be sliding down the ladder, working at some crap job, whereas you're going to be rising up. So just keep your mind on the larger issue there, and know that working with what your brain works well with will pay incredible rewards down the line.
When they talk about compounding returns in life, they always say that it's slow, then it's fast. And even this podcast, if you look at the graph of this podcast, for the first 3 years of me recording in my cupboard on Sunday nights alone, completely flat. No one's listening. And then by maybe I'd say year 4 or year 5, it goes straight up.
Yeah.
And that's a consequence of those first 3 years were acquiring skills, understanding what people liked and why they liked listening to the show, and actually getting better as a talker, a speaker, an interviewer, etc. And what most people miss is they miss that internship of the slow, lonely, unrewarding couple of years because they lose focus. No one's clapping, no downloads. I've never seen another route. I've never seen another path there. I've never seen the overnight success.
Well, I mean, I know I can name 5 other podcasters who have the same story as you who've told me that. Lewis Howes, Chris Williamson, Jay Shetty, they all have the same story. For several years, nothing. Crickets. And I knew these people when they were just starting out. And then that happens. I remember when I was working with 50 Cent on the book, The 50th Law, you know, people look at rap stars and they go, wow, the glamour, the fun, the excitement, the sexiness, the lifestyle. But he said, you know, I knew him because I was with him. Nobody worked harder than 50. He was incredibly disciplined and incredibly focused. And when he made it in the music business, it took incredible years of difficulty, hardship, and failure. But nobody ever sees that. They only see him in concert and all the glamour and all the fun. They never focus on the years of grit and near failure. He got shot, he nearly died. His record label dropped him. He had to work his way back up into the music industry from the very bottom until Eminem finally noticed him. But we don't see that in these celebrities, all the grit and the hard work that took them to get there. We just see the success and we get seduced by the success.
I've heard you reference before Howard Gardner's Frames of Mind, Theory of Multiple Intelligences book. And in that book, it says that there are 5 types of intelligences: logical intelligence, linguistical intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, spatial intelligence, and bodily intelligence. And it defines them quite differently. Logical is the ability to reason and solve problems and think in abstract terms like scientists and mathematicians. Linguistical intelligence is things like writers, lawyers, and poets. You're one of those writers. Interpersonal intelligence are leaders, psychologists, and teachers. Spatial intelligence are architects, artists, and pilots. And lastly, bodily intelligence is athletes, dancers, and surgeons. How important is it to know your form of intelligence to be successful in life?
So figuring out what that is incredibly important. And the reason why I like this book so much is we tend to think of intelligence as intellectual, as, you know, computer programming or mathematics or whatever it is, you know, having a PhD in this field. But that's not intelligence. Intelligence is also bodily intelligence. Like somebody like Kobe Bryant in basketball is as intelligent as Albert Einstein, but in a different way. So you have a parent who's always geared towards, you know, going to the best school and being an intellectual giant, and their child wants to do ballet or sports or something, and you kind of look down on that and you say, no. You're setting your child up for misery. Recognize what one of these frames are for your child and press on it and let them go in that direction, because it's what they're naturally gearing towards. It's what's fun, right? So if for me, it was linguistic intelligence, words. Since I was a child, words bewitch me. I can't believe that we have words to name things and that there are these symbols with letters that have sounds. But a lemon isn't a lemon, it's just a word. And I was like, 5 years old, what the hell can that be? That's so interesting, And that you could take a word apart and spell other words with it. So I knew from very early on that it was words, 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 words. And I absolutely stink at one of these intelligence is mechanical intelligence, knowing how to build things. I'm terrible at that, which is very odd because my father was brilliant at that and he wasn't good at any of the others and I didn't inherit it. So that goes all, that kind of debunks genetics right there. But, so figuring out which one of those and leaning in it and making that the direction of your life is so, so important. So if your thing is interpersonal intelligence and you understand that, and yet you're not heading into a job in which you're social and around people, you're going to be so miserable. But if you know that what your thing is interpersonal intelligence, you've got like 100 different directions you can head into. That doesn't mean you have to only be a social worker. It just means you have to be a leader of people because you understand you like being around people, you like working with others, you're very empathetic. There could be 100 different kinds of jobs. Mm-hmm. But once you know that, it gives you a sense of direction. It's by far the most important step for people, and I always recommend people reading this book because it's very, very important.
Much of the reason we lose focus, as I've seen in my own friendship group, in my own family, is because of envy.
Yeah.
How important is it to get control of one's envy? I've heard you describe it as the ugliest emotion.
Well, it's ugly in the sense of, it's an admission that you feel inferior, that you feel that somebody is better than you are. And who wants to admit that? There's a very famous psychologist named Alfred Adler from the 1920s. He was a disciple of Freud. He thought this ability of always wanting to be better and superior to others was the most motivating factor of 90% of human behavior, that we always want to feel at least that we're superior in some way. And the sense that we're inferior creates what he calls an inferiority complex. So it's very, very painful to tell yourself that this person is doing better than you are, or that they're younger and better looking than you are, that their wife is more interesting than you, or their kids are doing better, because it means it's a slight on you, right? We are very prone to envy genetically by the way our brains operate. So it's a known factor that chimpanzees are prone to feeling envy, right? If you give one chimp a banana or a grape and don't give another one, they'll be giving you that kind of evil eye, the stink eye that we associate with envy. So it's something that's in primates. And what it comes from, I believe, is our brains operate by comparison. That's how we learn. That's how we understand things. We understand that this is a wild animal because it's not that other thing over there. Our brains compare bits of information to decide what is what's different from what's the other thing. So our brains are geared towards comparing. And when you create a social animal, we are the most social animal on the planet, and you have that brain that's constantly comparing, we're using that mechanism to compare ourselves to other people and always wanting what other people have. And they've noticed in hunter-gatherer societies from back in 30,000 years ago, the few that still had existed in the 20th century, that envy was a huge problem among them. And so that when one person was given a gift, everybody in the tribe was so upset and angry that the person who was given the gift had to give it to other people so that they wouldn't be the target of envy, because it could lead to being murdered, right? So envy is deeply ingrained in all of us. We're constantly comparing ourselves to others, okay? But we don't want to admit it. So if I compare myself to some other writer who I think is having a better life than I am, who's sold more books than me, what I'll do in my mind, instead of saying, he deserves that or she deserves that because they are actually a better writer, I'll go, they don't really deserve it. They're a hack. They're just doing that because they know what the public wants. And they're not, my books are going to be read 100 years from now, but nobody will read their books in 5 years. I justify it to myself, right? I don't feel envy. No. I'm not saying that person's superior. In fact, they're actually inferior to me. That's the games that we play when we envy other people. And it's something that social media is like a nuclear bomb of envy, right? So 60 years ago, I wouldn't have known what my neighbors or friends from college are doing and how much more money they're making and how happy they are. But now you know what everybody on the planet is doing and how good they are and how happy they are and the incredible trips they're taking and, you know, the great schools that their children are getting into, on and on and on. So it's this machine for manufacturing envy, and it's infesting our political system as well. It's seeping into all aspects of life, but nobody wants to talk about it and nobody wants to admit it. The main thing with envy is to admit that you feel it, okay? So I will get on my hands and I will say, you know what? Sometimes I actually envy Ryan Holiday. He's 30 years younger than I am. He's written already more books than I have. Before I even wrote my first book, he's got a family. He's got these great homes. He's doing really well. Yeah, sometimes I feel envy. I'll admit it, okay? If you don't admit it to yourself, then it just festers and something ugly will happen. And so what I'm able to do with the feelings of envy that I might have is, I think, God, Robert, there's no reason to feel that way. Go through a process and go, he's actually deserved all the success he's had. You know, he deserves it because he's worked really, really hard and he's a really good person. He's ethical. He deserves it. And so you should be happy for him, which I am. I'm incredibly happy for him. But I have that first little twinge of envy. You have to admit it to yourself. And it's not an easy thing to admit because it means you're admitting you feel inferior for a moment.
Can you use it productively?
Yes.
That envy?
Yes, most definitely. And I talk in Laws of Human Nature about strategies for doing that. One of them is there's somebody that you envy in the world. Well, instead of festering with that ugly emotion, make that a spur. Instead of envy, feel what's called emulation, where you feel competitive and you're going to be as good as they are or better than they are. You're going to use that sense of inferiority to motivate you to work harder and harder and harder. Another thing is, so when somebody has failure and we're actually kind of gleeful about it, it's called Schadenfreude, right? Mm-hmm. The opposite of Schadenfreude is a phrase that Nietzsche called Mitfreude, which means instead of feeling pleasure in their pain, you feel their pleasure as well. So instead of feeling envy, try and feel happy for the other person. Now you'll say that I can't do that, but yes, you can. You have to practice it. There's a great psychologist named William James who called it an as-if strategy. So just tell yourself that I'm actually happy for their success. And when you do that, it's actually a really great feeling to actually feel good about somebody else doing well. Is a very ennobling feeling. It kind of raises you up. Instead of lowering you down and making you feel ugly, it makes you feel noble. It makes you feel better about yourself. And it kind of opens up your whole emotional life. So I have other strategies in the book, but those are a couple.
I was wondering why your book, Power, is still selling unbelievably well. I mean, most books, when they come out, they have their moment and then they're done. But for some reason, what you write in this book is as compelling, tempting, and attractive to people now more than ever. And one would then assume that's because people feel more powerless. And when they see the book, it offers them a promise of something that they so desperately want.
Yeah.
Is that an accurate assessment?
I think it is. I mean, I've noticed in the last 6 years or so, the sales have been higher than they've ever been before. And a lot of it, you know, young people went through the crash of 2008, then they had to deal with the COVID and the pandemic. And in those years where the world seemed upside down, the book was selling better than ever. So I think helplessness and feeling a loss of control and feeling like there might be something out there that can guide me a little bit in this very confusing, anarchic times that we're living through can be very seductive and very appealing. So, I mean, there's always change in our world. There's always chaos. But when the book came out in 1998, it wasn't nearly as chaotic as it is right now. So I think you're right. I do attribute the success not necessarily to my brilliance or to the brilliance of the book, but to the fact that people are feeling more and more powerless.
People are lonelier than ever, according to many of the stats. And when you look at the impact that's having on people, it's equal to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, according to some reports. They're more likely to live alone. They're more likely to feel lonely, to report feeling lonely. They're more likely to feel that they have nobody to turn to in a time of crisis, according to some studies as well.
Yeah.
They're more addicted than ever before. You can class that in a number of ways, chemical addictions, but social media addictions and other things. And that's the state of especially young men. You know, it's young women too are having their own struggles, especially with anxiety and the comparisons and those kind of things we've talked about. But young people generally, and especially young men, are killing themselves at higher rates than ever before. Suicide, as you know, is one of the biggest killers of young men. What is the antidote for this? This sense of powerlessness, loneliness, isolation, addiction, aimlessness?
Well, you know, our tendency would be to bring it down to the individual level, but I think it's also a cultural problem. I think our culture is contributing to it. The kind of aimlessness in our culture where we don't really talk about the skills that are necessary to get ahead. Our culture promotes all kinds of bad values. It emphasizes fame and celebrity. It doesn't talk about discipline. It doesn't give young men a sense of purpose and direction. It doesn't value them. You know, right now, a lot of young men feel like, it's women that are getting all the attention. Why am I, what is my purpose here? So I think it's a cultural problem more than anything else. And when I say that, that kind of absolves individuals. But I don't mean to do that as well, because you are an individual, you live in this culture, and you've got to get yourself out of that kind of hole that this culture is imposing on you. And so I have a lot of sympathy for it, because I don't think it's completely your fault that you feel lonely, or that you're isolated, or that you don't have friends, that you don't know how to socialize. You know, I didn't have this phone in my hand when I was in my formative years, and I had to meet women when I wanted to, at that point in my life in the 70s when I was in my 20s. And so I had to go out there and suffer from rejection. I had to go to bars, I had to go to clubs. I had to put myself out there and meet them, and it was tough. And I learned skills, seduction skills, whatever you want to call them, but just social skills about, women think differently than you. They have different values than you. What are their values? Get outside of yourself and think about what it's like to be them and what you can do that's going to please them and get them, how you can enter into their world. You have none of that now, none of that. It's all,
Swipe, swipe, swipe.
Yeah. So you're not going out, you're not developing that muscle, you're not putting yourself in live in interacting with people where you're feeling their body language, their nonverbal communication. So no wonder your social skills are atrophying. And as your social skills atrophy, it becomes harder and harder and harder to go out there and put yourself on the line because you're not good at it. So you fall into this hole of becoming lonelier and lonelier because it's harder and harder to get out of it. Okay? So I have tremendous empathy, and I would never preach or blame young men in particular for the problems that they're having. And I empathize with it very much so because I myself went through a phase where I felt very, very unhappy and even suicidal when I was younger. And I understand how your life can turn that way. So I don't mean to ever come across as somebody who has all the answers, because I think it's cultural. But if you are an individual, you have to see that, first of all, it's not a bad thing necessarily to be lonely. Part of the problem of loneliness is it's got this taboo against it, this bad name. Like, it's terrible to be lonely, terrible to be alone, right? And so you feel shamed for the fact that you're lonely. But actually, it's extremely important in life to be alone sometimes and to be able to be on your own and to think about yourself and to kind of come to terms with who you are and to embrace what makes you different. And you can't do that if you feel ashamed about being lonely or if you can't ever be alone. So knowing how to be alone is very important. It's what will make you successful. It will bring you skills. So don't think of it as something necessarily terribly negative in your life. But the other thing is you have to force yourself. You force yourself to go to the gym to develop muscles and become stronger. You have to force yourself to interact with people and get out of your phone and have real experiences instead of virtual experiences. And if you do that 10 times a month, just like going to the gym 10 times a month, your social skills will get better and better. Your social muscle will get better and better, and you'll feel better about interacting with people.
On that point, I remember law, I think it was law 18. I'm just having a look.
About isolation, yeah.
Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous.
Yeah.
Solitude is not a defense because it cuts you off from valuable information, allies, and opportunities. There's a difference, isn't there, between being lonely and being alone? Because being alone is one thing, but the state of loneliness feels like it's a slightly different proposition.
Well, it's the difference between you feel very unhappy that you're not connecting to other people. We're a social animal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you feel like people don't like you, they don't respect you, that you can't interact with them on a level that's meaningful. Whereas the feeling of being alone for me, wow, I don't have to be around ugly, idiotic people. I can just be by myself. I can read a good book. I don't have to interact with people whose ideas I don't like. I can just be myself and be as weird as I want. Wow, what a relief. I'm so happy being alone. Now, I'm not like that all the time. It would be terrible. But sometimes I do feel that way. And that's the difference. And that's a good thing. I remember once I was on an airplane and I saw a young woman who was by herself, and I could sense that it was driving her crazy, and she had to use her phone to never feel alone, right? Even in the middle when we're flying over the ocean, she had to somehow connect onto the internet and be sending emails and texts and anything. And I got this kind of desperation in her, this intuition, this feeling that being alone was just horrifying for her, and I think that's not a good thing. I think it's a terrible thing. So yes, isolation is bad. You need to be, you're a social animal. You're meant to be around other people. But if you can't be alone, you can't ever figure out what makes you different and what makes you unique. So you have to be able to play both sides of the game.
To listen to that voice.
Yeah.
Inside, to turn inwards.
Yeah.
It is hard to turn inwards when you never have moments of solitude, I guess. When you said you were suicidal in your earlier years.
Yeah.
What lifted you out of that state?
Well, I had a girlfriend who was very understanding, who helped me a lot. So I wasn't completely alone. And then a little tiny voice inside of me was saying, you have interesting thoughts. You're a strange person, Robert. I've always been strange. I never was like other people, and even in high school, I was always something off about me, which could be made me lonely, which could make me be a problem. But I kept saying, there's something different and off about you, right? And you have skills as a writer. It's going to happen someday. Don't give up, don't give up, don't give up. Keep trying, right? And so finally, I'm 35, 36 years old. I was in Italy at the lowest point of my life. And then I met this man there who was a book packager, Joost Elfers, and he asked me if I had an idea for a book. And suddenly, I almost get emotional just thinking about it. Everything just shifted inside of me. It's like, yeah, I could write a nonfiction book. And I just improvised what would turn into the 48 Laws of Power. He got so excited. He said, I will pay you to write I forget what the word is, to sell it, and then I'll pay you to live while you write it. And so suddenly it went from darkness to light because I had a purpose. And all of my misery, I could take all of the bad bosses I had, all of the horrible psychotic bosses who were so stupid and so political and so manipulative. And I could go, wow, I've got all this material to write the 48 Laws of Power. All my worst experiences can go into this book. It all has purpose for it. I'm not saying that's going to happen to everybody, but I was literally at that moment before it happened, pretty much near rock bottom. And I asked my wife, what would have happened if this didn't turn out? Would I have committed suicide? Would I if I'd gone the same path and gotten into done some hack job, I'd probably be incredibly overweight and alcoholic, and I might have already died of a heart attack. Or maybe I would have found my way to something else, but it was a really, really low point in my life.
Purpose.
Yeah.
It's crazy how it can lift you out of darkness. It can turn the lights on.
Yeah.
It's just so unbelievably hard to find for so many people. I mean, you're not going to find it in your bedroom necessarily, sat there thinking.
But opportunities come. You just have to be ready for them. So I had this opportunity that came to me. And you might say, well, that's lucky. That's never going to happen to me. But it will happen to you. You're just not ready for it. You're just not recognizing it. Some person will cross your path that can lift you out of what you're doing, who could connect you, but you're not paying attention. You're not ready for it. You don't think you deserve it. So there is opportunity every day of the week. It's around you, is what I'm trying to say.
There's so many studies, and there was one on TV by, I think it was Darren Brown, the illusionist, that show certain types of people are pessimistic towards opportunity. And when you do studies and there's one particular study where they have a newspaper and they give it to one group of people who I think are pessimists and one group of people that are optimists. And the researchers say, when you find the £100 voucher or $100 voucher, just come back to us. And what happens is they scroll through the newspaper and the pessimists never find it. But on the first page of the newspaper, it says, stop, go to the researchers now, you've won $100. The optimists find it. And Darren Brown did a similar thing, the illusionist, in the street, where he put, I think it was like a £50 or $100 note in the middle of the street as they were walking down the street. And the optimists find it, they see it. But the pessimists just walk right past it.
Yeah.
I think it was a winning scratch card potentially. And that really opened my mind to like my state, my mental state, my psychology is determining whether I see these opportunities or totally miss them. And then it's almost this downward spiral because then I'll think, God, I'm such an unlucky person.
Right.
Without realizing that I'm playing a really important role in creating my own fortune or misfortune.
Right. Yeah, I have a chapter in Laws of Human Nature about the nature of your attitude creates your circumstances, which is sort of the same thing you're saying, which is there are two kinds of attitudes that I talk about. One is an attitude that's closing, that's constrictive, that's narrow, and there's one that's expansive and open. You could call that pessimistic and optimistic. But the closed attitude is you're only seeing life through this narrow little spectrum where everything is bad, people don't like you, there's hostility all around you. And what that means is you're not seeing reality, you're creating reality. You're creating that reality. You're seeing it, and that's what happens to you. The expansive attitude is, life is amazing. All these incredible things are possible. I have hope. Any moment there could be an opportunity. And that's not reality either, but you're going to create that reality by feeling that way and seizing an opportunity, the smallest crumb of an opportunity, you're going to create those good circumstances. So by your attitude, you create the bad things that happen to you in life.
One of the sort of adjacent points here about purposelessness, about loneliness, about the struggles and plights of young men in the world that they face and young women is the conversation around pornography. If you go on many of the social media apps these days, you will be exposed to pretty explicit pornography, whether you were searching for it or not. There's certain apps in particular where even if I'm scrolling on my feed, certain things will pop up and I go, Jesus Christ, I'm at work here. And I was thinking about this more broadly because the studies show that I think it's like 80% of men and about 40% of women in the United States use pornography. And I wondered if you had a view on how it robs us of the hard work it takes to form romantic relationships.
Yeah.
And if the act of consuming pornography is robbing us of the desire for the real thing.
Well, it's an addiction, and you have to understand that you are being manipulated, that you are being programmed, that these people have figured out exactly the kinds of things, the kinds of images that are going to hook you, and you're being played. You're a fool. They're playing with you, just like Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook knows all the algorithms to hook you to to the news feed. You're being played by the images they know how to create and keep you always wanting more. Just like fast food has all these tricks to constantly be eating their Doritos or whatever it is. Okay? But the other thing is, so I'm not going to preach and moralize about pornography from a prudish aspect of it, because I'm not a prude. But I have a chapter in the book that I'm writing on the sublime, on what I call love sublime, and the act of loving not God, not the universe, but another human being, an individual, man or woman, gay or straight or whatever it is, and how sublime that is. And what it is in that relationship, the boundaries between the two of you are allowed to melt, and your ego can soften, and you can feel their world and they can feel your world, and you have a connection that for a social animal is the highest form of connection. It's superior to a religious connection, I'm sorry. And what it requires is, we have the expression falling in love. And it literally is falling. It's like you fall. You're open and you're vulnerable and you're letting yourself fall. And when you're not, what stops you from doing that is you don't want to be hurt. You don't want to be vulnerable, right? Because if you open yourself to someone else, you're likely to get hurt. And so the moment there's a disagreement between you, or there's a moment where a friend says something nasty about this person you're interested in, you stop falling, you cut it off, and that romantic thing ends and dies. But if you get past that and you allow yourself to open up completely and you just keep falling, this incredible thing can happen. And I describe it to you, and I describe it, the dynamics of that and examples of that, and why for a social animal it's like the ultimate experience. And so pornography is completely robbing you of that, because love of another human being is a sense of enchantment, right? There's like this spark that's happening, this electricity, and it's obviously sex is involved, so it's a very physical relationship as well, but it goes beyond that. It also has a kind of spiritual component, right? But it's a sense of enchantment where the world becomes alive to you. Everything is beautiful in the world in those moments, right? Mm-hmm. And pornography is disenchanting you from everything. It's making it all mechanical and ugly, and it has no romance to it. It has no dimension to it. It's almost as if the two humans involved in it, or however, are like machine parts, right? They're not human anymore. And there's no emotion involved. There's no kind of spiritual connection. It's depressing. It's really, really depressing. When I see it, I feel really sorry that I experienced this, and I feel really sorry for the people who are in that industry. I find it really, really ugly and alienating. Now, I'm not, as I said, a prude, and I could watch a great movie with a love scene in it, and it's very exciting and beautiful. But the seduction element, the element of, I saw a movie recently, a Japanese movie by the great director Ozu from the 50s, and there was a man who was married, and he was about to have an affair with this woman who was kind of seducing him. And they had this kiss. I thought, wow. I might use the word turned on, but I was getting really excited. It was so full of emotion and energy, and it made the sexual element so much more powerful by the element of romance, by the element of something kind of transgressive. There was no nude bodies. There was no sex you ever get to see. But the lead up to it and the nature of the emotions involved made it, to me, deeply, deeply exciting. And if young men particularly can't have that experience, if everything is so mechanical, is so computerized, it's going to be like AI. It's going to be like AI sex, Then you're losing your soul. You're losing your capacity for really falling in love, for really having that kind of dimensional experience, which, by the way, can be extremely physical, and it can only last for 3 months. I'm not saying it has to be 20 years with one woman or one man. It can be for 3 months, but it enriches you. It makes you more human.
I've invested more than £1 million into this company, Perfect TED, and they're also a sponsor of this podcast. I switched over to using matcha as my dominant energy source, and that's where Perfect TED comes in. They have the matcha powders, they have the matcha drinks, they have the pods, and all of this keeps me focused throughout a very, very long recording day, no matter what's going on. And their team is obsessed with quality, which is why they source their ceremonial grade matcha from Japan. So when people say to me that they don't like the taste of matcha, I'm guessing that they haven't tried Perfect TED. Unlike low-quality matcha that has a bitter, grassy taste, Perfect TED is smooth and naturally sweet. And without knowing it, you're probably a Perfect TED customer already if you're getting your matcha at places like Blank Street or Joe in the Juice. But now, you can make it yourself at home. So give it a try and we'll see if you still don't like matcha. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 40% off our matcha if you try it today. Head to perfectted.com and use code Steven40. Or if you're in a supermarket, you can get it at Tesco's or Holland & Barrett or in the Netherlands at Albert Heijn. And those of you in the US, you can get it on Amazon. The other thing that a couple of psychologists on my podcast before have alluded to on this subject is that they told me about a study with rats where they messed with the part of the rat's brain that is responsible for causing dopamine.
Yeah.
And then when they put food in front of the rat's mouth, if the rat was like 6 inches from the rat's mouth, the rat would starve to death because they had impacted the rat's dopamine. So it no longer had motivation. And they speak of dopamine as this sort of motivation chemical. It's the thing that gets you to take action. So if you're frying your dopamine receptors by doing these sort of high dopamine activities.
Oh, right.
I'm wondering if we're sort of breeding a culture of lower motivation individuals. And because of this thesis, I was kind of looking at some studies around this, and it does say that constant exposure to high dopamine activities can lead to dopamine desensitization or deregulation of dopamine receptors. And then this can lead to a significant reduction in your motivation. And there's multiple studies here that point in this direction. So I'm wondering how, when I look at some of the stats around purposeless and people having less partners and being more sexless, if there's a through line here that when you make dopamine easy through pornography, we're less likely to go in, get up out of our bedroom and take an action.
Yeah, but it's not just pornography. There's too much of that in social media as well on other levels. So, you have to you have to understand what it means to be a human being, first of all. And we're physical animals. We can't be in our heads all the time. We think with our bodies, right? We think with the chemicals mixing in our bodies. We're very physical and we're social animals to the core. And that social animal, what makes us superior is that we connect. I can kind of look at you and I can maybe understand what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and we can have a discussion and our ideas can go back and forth and connect and go to higher levels of understanding or lower levels of disagreement. But that's what it means to be a human being. You're not this fucking AI machine. You're not a bot. You're not an algorithm. You're not a little piece of data that Mark Zuckerberg can mix with. You're a human being with a body, with physical problems, with hormones, with emotions that are coursing through you. And you have to become a physical creature, which means doing things in the world, taking action, working, building a business, doing things with your hands, exercise, meeting people. Be inside of your bodies. And when you're in pornography, you're disembodied. You're not in your body. You might be wanking off, as far as I know, probably are, but you're not really inside of your body in any meaningful way. And so it's like my hope, if there's any hope, is that, and there's seeds of it in the world now, where young people are going to start getting disgusted with this because the human spirit is still very powerful. And it's still like, I don't want to be like this. It doesn't feel natural.